Good evening, everyone. I'm Henry Garrido. I am a co-chair of this commission along with Arva Rice. Thank you, Madam Chair. We want to thank the team at BMCC for being wonderful hosts to us this evening. We are here because we've been tasked with doing a comprehensive review of the city charter. The commission will focus on improving and restoring public confidence in city government by strengthening local democracy and enhancing accountability and transparency. The commission is composed of 17 commissioners and it includes representation for every city elected official. We will undertake an open, inclusive process that prioritizes robust public engagement to utilize the input of New Yorkers and perform an analysis from policy experts in the development of proposals that improve city government. The commission will not be considering any proposals that weaken local democracy of New Yorkers' rights. While this commission was convened via local law passed by the city council, we are an independent body. Emphasis added. It is our goal to hear from experts and everyday New Yorkers to propose substantial, effective amendments to the city charter. Any proposal, regardless of the merits that can be achieved by local law, will likely not be up for our consideration. I want to take a moment to talk about the process here. Folks may be aware that we are not the only charter commission tasked with reviewing the charter. This commission is a distinct entity from the Charter Revision Commission that has been convened by the mayor. Both commissions are working simultaneously but separately. For our part, this commission will continue to hold hearings like this across the 5 boroughs and issue reports to get public and expert feedback on our ideas over the next several months. I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Arva Rice, to say a few words. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Henry. My name is Arva Rice, and I'm president and CEO of the New York Urban League. Last week, we held our first hearing in Brooklyn, where we heard testimony from a variety of advocates on a range of issues. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from folks today. At each of our meetings, I'm struck by how timely our charge is. The charter is our city's governing document, our Constitution. Given our federal constitutional crisis and the overwhelming daily, sometimes hourly news out of Washington, I'm happy to be here today and grateful to be with you all and thank you for joining us and sharing your ideas.
Thank you, Arva. Next, I'd like to ask the members of the commission to briefly introduce themselves, starting here to my right. Count. Robert. Robert, you have to press it and hold it, otherwise.
How's this?
That's good, thank you.
Good evening, Robert Miralles, proudly representing the Bronx and Bronx Borough President Vanessa L. Gibson.
Mike Rasiopo, proudly representing Brooklyn and the appointee of Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Navardo Lopez, here appointed by Speaker Adams.
Hello, I'm Andrea Salwin-Copel. I'm the Executive Director of National Council of Jewish Women, New York, and also appointed by Speaker Adams.
Rachel Goodman, I'm the Chief of Staff in the New York City Comptroller's Office and the Comptroller's appointee to the commission.
Good evening, Mac Awab, appointed by the Manhattan Borough President.
Good evening. I'm Manny Pastriche, the president of SEIU Local 32BJ and appointed by the speaker.
Good evening, Rahul Agarwal, appointed by the mayor. Good evening.
Alan Swisher, appointed by the Queensborough president.
Bishop Calvin Rice, appointed by Speaker Adams.
Thank you all. We also are staffed by extremely well talented folks. The council, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good evening. I'm Jessica Boulay, Counsel for Research and Policy for the Commission.
Thank you, everyone. The first order of business is to adopt the minutes that have been distributed for our March 5th meeting. They've been distributed to everyone. Please keep in mind, commissioners need not be present to approve the minutes. So let me start. Are there any questions about the minutes? Okay. Then in that case, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Motion has been made.
Second.
Do I hear a second?
Second, Calvin Rice.
So motion has been made and properly second. Do we hear, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and so order, the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. So now we're gonna hear testimony. Before we begin, please let me remind you that this is a formal government proceeding, and that the quorum shall be observed at all time. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. Video recording or photography is not allowed from the witness table. At tonight's hearing, we're going to ask folks to limit their testimony to 3 minutes in relations to and strengthening local democracy and improving government transparency and accountability through the revision of the city charter. Commissioners are encouraged to ask questions based on testimony given. Written testimony can be submitted to info@thecommission.nyc. I'll say that again, info@thecommission.nyc. It can be any length and welcome it within 72 hours of this hearing. I'd like to ask the first witness to come to the table. Please introduce yourself and keep it to 3 minutes. Who is it?
We'd like to invite Stephen Morales from the Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine's office.
Good evening, co-chairs Garrido and Rice and members of this commission. My name is Stephen Morales. I'm Policy Director for Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine. And on behalf of the Borough President, I want to highlight proposals that will help achieve this commission's mission to strengthen local democracy and ensure accountability. The first comes to paying nonprofits on time. We all know the crucial role that nonprofits play in delivering essential services, nutritious meals, healthcare, childcare, legal services, and more to our city's residents. However, the city often fails to pay these organizations on time, which disrupts services and forces them to take out expensive loans. In addition, in this rapidly shifting federal funding environment, it's especially risky to our city's finances to have unpaid contracts on the city's ledger. The issue of delayed contract payments stems in part from the city agency's failure to submit contracts to the comptroller's office in a timely manner. A recent report by the comptroller showed that only about half of human services contracts are submitted for registration before the contract start date. So we are calling for, to fix this, in chapters 13, section 311 of the charter, to mandate the procurement policy board require agencies to submit contracts to the comptroller at least 30 days before that contract start date. In addition, for invoices that are submitted and delayed due to minor disputes over small portions of a contract's value, we are calling for this commission to consider requiring the procurement policy board to mandate that the city pay a minimum percentage of an invoice's value upon receipt of that invoice. And then over time, disputes can be resolved, but this would allow nonprofits to continue providing services while also ensuring accountability. A couple of other recommendations. One, as it pertains to community board support. Community boards are a vital forum for local residents to contribute to decision-making, and the borough presidents have the honor and the charge of appointing and supporting those boards. But the charter is very unclear when it comes to what technical supports are required for community boards. And so while flexibility is important, also additional clarity is necessary. And so we are calling for revisions to the charter to make it much more clear the responsibilities of technical support that borough presidents must offer. And if borough presidents must offer additional responsibilities, then they should be funded accordingly. Finally, for community boards, the city, in particular, DCAS, should be required to help community boards secure public space for public meetings. Similar to community boards, community education councils are vital for parents to contribute to our local education system. And we believe the charter should be amended such that the Department of Education be given the responsibility to support CECs, similarly to the way that borough presidents support community boards. I want to speak briefly about capital funding for local organizations. In section 211 of the charter, the formula by which capital funding is allocated to borough presidents to support local organizations is based on factors relating to population and geographic area. However, in Manhattan, we have a disproportionate amount of major cultural and healthcare institutions, which are enjoyed by New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs and visitors alike. And so we are suggesting that this formula be adjusted to reflect Manhattan's unique value and the unique needs of Manhattan and New Yorkers. And last, but certainly not least, when it comes to budget oversight and fiscal reporting, in particular with respect to the budget process and negotiations between the council and the mayor's office, Chapter 10 of the charter lays out the responsibilities and the process for the mayor, council, and director of OMB as part of the city budget. However, while the comptroller is charged with analyzing assumptions and methodologies used in making revenue estimates, there is no place where the council nor the mayor are required to utilize these estimates. And so we are hoping to fix this by offering an amendment to Chapter 11 of the charter so that to require a third-party report led by the comptroller's office that would be used both by the council and the mayor for the preliminary budget, the preliminary budget response, and the executive budget. Having a single utilized source would mean that that all parties, including the general public, would have a clear sense of what was happening in our city budget negotiation process and would increase accountability and transparency. Borough President Levine strongly believes that addressing the issues that we outlined today with appropriate revisions to our charter will help strengthen our democratic institutions and make New York a more thriving, inclusive city. Thank you for your time today, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. Before we go on, are there any, I understand we have some commissioners that have joined us online. Could you hear us? Can you introduce yourselves?
Hi there. Sure. Can you hear me?
No, we cannot.
You can't hear me.
Okay, somebody. All right, let's try this again. Try it again.
Hi, everyone. This is Serena Longley. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So happy to be here, and I'll just quickly introduce myself. Like the other commissioners, I'm honored to have been appointed by City Council Speaker Adrian Adams, and I'm looking forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Morales, for the testimony already.
All right. So I feel like DJ Khaled now. So we're gonna open up on questions. I have one, Mr. Morales. I mean, you suggested advancing funding for not-for-profits, which has been part of the discussion, but you did not suggest an actual percentage. And at times, there have been time where the city has advanced a quarter of the funds. Sometimes it's advanced half of the funds. Sometimes they have suggested nonprofits to use the borrowing system that they pay back. In your testimony, do you have a suggested amount that should be forwarded or upfronted to nonprofits that are on the contract with the city of New York?
I think that's likely going to want to leave that open to vary based on the specifics of a contract. But I'm happy to follow up with the commission afterward for further discussion.
Yeah, that would be important because you were very specific on the section of the charter that you wanted to amend. So if you're that specific, then we need specifics too. All right. All right. Are there any questions by any other commissioners?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. As somebody who's worked in nonprofit for almost 30 years in New York City, the payment struggle is very real. I really appreciate what you said because we have in the Pan Asian community, some of the nonprofits are huge, some of the nonprofits are teeny tiny. They do both types do great work. And the problem with the big ones, they're struggling just as much because they have more staff, they have more overhead. With the federal government gutting funding to vital work, it is so imperative that we get money out to the nonprofit organizations. I can't tell you the calls that I have stepped away from my ED role, but I still get calls from EDs asking, what do I do? Because my 30% of my federal contract got cut overnight. So now how do I keep staff, keep programming going, and asking a lot of really difficult questions? And if the city would just pay a little quicker and get the contract done. Sometimes, I used to joke that sometimes when you submit paperwork, like does somebody eat it? Like, why do you have to submit everything in triplicate over and over and over again? Things have, been a little, I think it's going a little faster, but I think now there are times when certain contracts feel like they go into the black hole. This is the biggest gripe of every nonprofit. I know we got money, but where's the contract? Do we get an advance? How come nobody's paying out? And it should not take the executive director of an organization to call the comptroller to beg to say, can you make this contract go faster? Can you find out what the status is? So I really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, I believe, Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for the testimony. I have one question on the testimony relating to community boards and technical assistance. I really appreciate your proposals in that area. I think it was the 2018 commission that established some of those responsibilities in the Civic Engagement Commission, and was wondering if you could sort of give us any perspective on how that is working. If not, what changes could be made, or if this should just be brought into the borough presidents. Thanks so much again.
I'll have to get back to you on the Civic Engagement Commission piece. But again, just want to reiterate the importance of supporting those community boards with that technical assistance, but I will get back to you on that one.
Madam Co-Chair, you believe you have a question?
I wanted to follow up to Commissioner Yu's comment about the payment of nonprofits. So at this point, having run a nonprofit myself for over 15 years, our goal is to get the contract registered 6 months into the contract's operation, right? So if we can get a contract actually up and operational and functioning by January, we feel like we have a win. So to say that you want to have contracts registered 30 days before they begin, excuse me, would mean that you would want a contract registered on June 1 instead of on July 1. And I'm just trying to figure out if my math is correct, right? And if you have a mechanism by which you could see that happening.
In terms of mechanism, I think the best mechanism we have is the procurement policy board. In addition, working together with the comptroller. I think to your first part, I'm not a deep expert in the contracting process and timelines, but the goal here is we know that the roughly 50% of contracts are not even submitted to the comptroller's office until after that contract begins. So clearly that contract is going to be paid out not on time, especially for human service providers who often, unlike, maybe a construction project that won't put a shovel in the ground until that contract is ready to go, a human service provider who's offering essential services might be doing that work anyway. And so if that contract, which is fully executed and ready to go, has not been submitted to the comptroller, that's what we want to get ahead of by ensuring that RFPs are run more quickly, are run more efficiently. Also recognizing that there are things that take time and there is reason for some of that. So we want to make sure it's all built in properly.
But Mr. Morales, just a clarification about that as a follow-up. Are you suggesting the amendment only happens for human services contracts or for all contracts?
I think the most acute issue right now from our perspective is human services contracts, but it is a problem across the board.
Commissioner, any questions? No? Yes. Hi, Rachel, sorry.
That seems like it would be fine. Am I getting feedback or, okay. I also wanted. Whoa, okay, sorry. I don't know if you had any conversations with the Brooklyn Borough president, but his staff testimony to the commission meeting last week about community boards actually called for an independent community board support unit, kind of like the central staff at the city council. And it seems like you're recommending just additional resources to the borough presidents, but at some point I'd be curious to know if between the borough presidents, there's like a consensus on which things would be the most valuable.
Thank you. I had not seen and have not talked with the Brooklyn Borough President's office yet, but certainly will. And to be clear, we're not just calling for resources. We want the definition of technical support to really be laid out, because that is the most crucial part right now. We want to make sure all community boards have access to the proper support. Thank you.
Entirely different set of folks, so.
Are there any more questions for? Yep. Commissioner Master.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd actually like to follow up on one of the questions that the chair asked about sort of why obviously nonprofits and human services provide incredible services to the city. But my union employs tens of thousands of workers who work for city contracts and I guess what you would call the private sector, security officers and cleaning, and sort of where you draw the distinction between those two areas.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Let me be clear. I'm not here to draw those distinctions. I think what I wanted to do is emphasize the human service nonprofits are, like I said earlier, experiencing an especially acute challenge with these contracts, but it is a problem beyond that. So I think we need to make sure that our contracting system is reformed so that we're paying everyone on time.
Thank you. We want to note that we've been joined by Commissioner Mark Winston Griffith. Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Would you like to say anything before we continue? You have to press and hold.
Do I want to say anything? Hi, good evening. Sorry I'm late. Mark Winston Griffith. I am a representative of the Public Advocate, and I am the co-executive director of Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Are there any other questions, any further questions for this testimony? No, thank you, Mr. Morales.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are now going to call the next witness, Louisa Schaefer, New York City Independent Budget Office. Welcome. Yeah, unfortunately, you have to press and keep pressing.
Good evening, Co-Chair Garrido and Rice, Executive Director Castaldi Micah, members of the Commission. I'm Louisa Chafee, and I'm the Director of the New York City Independent Budget Office. And can you hear me? Because my testimony is going to sound very similar to one you just heard, but I'm very excited to talk to you about all of this. So IBO is a nonpartisan independent government agency mandated by the New York City Charter. IBO's mission is to enhance public understanding of New York City's budget, public policy, and economy through independent analysis. I'm submitting detailed testimony today that includes recommendations on how to strengthen the city's budget framework and improve budget transparency. But this evening, I'll primarily focus on the need to ensure fairness and efficiency in contract spending. Most government services for vulnerable New Yorkers are provided by nonprofits under contract with New York City government. As any household knows, sound fiscal management means paying one's bills on time. Yet, New York City often does not. Nowhere is there a greater risk than for human service programs such as pre-K, senior centers, and services for the unhoused. City Council passed Local Law 169, which will eventually address part of the problem, which is contract registration. But that's only half the story. Reforms to address late payments, which could be accomplished with some relatively simple charter amendments, would promote your goals of enhancing accountability and transparency. So why aren't the city's bills paid on time? Sometimes it's because a contract ends and the responsible city agency does not complete the process of entering into a new contract soon enough. So as detailed in my written testimony, it's necessary for the charter to ensure that existing contracts will be extended so that payments don't lapse when there's a gap, when there's a gap between contract end date and contract start date. Providers also experience long gaps in payment after contracts are registered. City agencies typically withhold payment on an entire invoice whenever there are questions about any single item on the invoice, even when most of the invoice is undisputed. A solution for this would be for the charter to require a PPB rule to require that city agencies pay very soon after initial invoice receipt a minimum percentage for each invoice from a contractor in good standing. IBO also supports several other charter changes to advance the goals of ensuring accountability by the city. The first of this is that the commission could set clear charter mandate and responsibilities for the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, similar to those already in place for other mayoral functions, such as the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Operations. Making MOX a charter agency would elevate importance and could require a procurement mayor's management report, giving transparency about how the procurement process is working. I'd also like to briefly mention limiting the extended use of emergency contracting, which we all experience during the asylum seeker arrival process. It is very expensive generally, and the solution would be to require the mayor and the controller to renew their joint determination that the emergency existed 2 years after the initial determination. Right now, once the determination has made, it's indefinite. Finally, I'd like to focus on an overlooked but very important reform from the 1989 charter that merits further attention by your commission, we believe. It's units of appropriation. What are they? They are the single categories within the budget that are used, quote, for a particular program, purpose, activity, or institution. Currently, there are no standards across agencies as to what can be in a UA. So we have huge UAs where you can't tell the nuances. And it means that both the council doesn't have oversight and the public doesn't really understand where the money's going. A solution could be, just as various other parts of the budget process require that 4 years planning happens or a 10-year capital plan, there could be in the charter a requirement at a regular interval that the entire city UA structure be considered and adjusted as appropriate, so as to manage the balance between transparency and granularity, which is the current tension. IBO welcomes the opportunity to work with you around these and other issues, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the testimony. Are there any questions? I have one. As it relates to the power of OMB, we have seen an unprecedented case where OMB has, in my opinion, right, exercised powers to delay payment and delay allocation to agency, especially when it comes to headcount. How do you see that process being more transparent and more useful for instance, as we see nationally, when the city council appropriates money for particular services and it's not being delivered or spent for the agency?
Right. So if the unit of appropriation were clearer, it would be easier for the public or experts or other people in the council to understand what's in each program. I'm going to give an example of PD. 1/4 of their budget is in a single unit of appropriation. 123 precinct houses and all detective works and various other programs are in a single UA. If you're trying to find out what's the budget for my borough or my precinct, you have no way of knowing. That seems to be in no way granular enough. So I think if the UAs had more detail, it would allow people, it would adhere to the 1989 spirit, and it would allow people to understand more of how city monies are being spent and give the council appropriate oversight when changes are being proposed.
Are there any questions for any of the commissioners?
I'm ready. I have a question.
My question is the same as to the previous speaker. Why do you pull out private sector companies that are doing contracts with the city as a separate issue, I think you said not to be dealt with when they, these are companies protecting shelters, cleaning buildings, doing vital services, but they happen to be a private sector company providing services to the city, maybe getting paid on a delay versus a human service.
Thank you for the question. I would say the distinction is not whether the company is public or private. I would say the distinction is how was the procurement organized. Human services, if we talk about private sector companies, many of them have business. I'm not talking about security guards, but let's say construction, have multiple different clients. And so if a city contract isn't registered, they can deploy their workforce to another area and wait until the city contract is ready. They're not obliged necessarily to proceed with business. In human services, security guards are often subcontractors to human service providers. So, for example, shelter providers. So that would count in the human service arena because that security guard entity is also then subject to the delay. But the reason human services are particularly vulnerable has to do with the fact that one, generally 100% of their business is government funded. It might be all city or city and state, but there's not a lot of private funding except for maybe fee for service in very certain areas. So one, the human service provider is government funded, and two, to have an interruption in service is incredibly difficult. If one's operating an older New York center, what one might think of as a senior center, and the contract is 6 months late, to shut doors and then reopen in 6 months is very difficult on the client base. It's against the mission of the organization. And it's also really hard for the workforce to be, suspended on some level. By the human service contracts are, if you look at the data overall, much, much later than other contracts within the city. And so the focus, I think, has been on the segment of New York City's economic sector, the nonprofit sector, or human service providing sector. That is incredibly important, that is really under attack from many levels, and that is particularly subject to the lateness that the city's currently experiencing. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Louisa. Good to see you. I had a question. I want to talk about subcontracting. We see that a lot in the community, and the community that I particularly work in, they're often the sub-grantees. And so they don't get to claim the client numbers and the expertise. And sometimes when there are increases to the contractor from the city for certain costs, it doesn't necessarily get passed down to the subcontractors. In fact, the subcontractors don't even know. I've heard so many stories, over 10 years of how unfair this is. Cost of living, the nonprofits a cost of living, but it doesn't, the subs don't get a cost of living. And so I'd love to hear, how do we talk about this and put some transparency in there to make sure that everybody who serves under the same contract, they get all the benefits, so that way nobody, because people feel like, oh, I'm just, this is the only way I'm going to be able to do this. And so there's a lot of resentment.
So I think we could spend hours talking about contracting primes and subs. And while I'm sure the commission is delighted with this topic, I think they have other people coming too. I basically, Joanne, the devil's in the contract. And so how the contract is established, by which city agency, by which program, really shapes how subcontractors are set. But I think that in terms of fairness for timeliness and workforce support, it's an area that could be addressed and could be, for example, called out in what I refer to as the procurement MMR, because it would be interesting to see how many contracts have subcontractors, for what areas, what are they paid on average? I mean, that's the kind of reporting that the public would benefit understanding where city tax dollars are being used.
Are there any other questions by the commissioners? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I wanted to dig into the units of appropriation just a little bit. I mean, this has been an issue for as long as I can remember, as you say, go back decades. You described sort of one possible approach. Are there other approaches that you all have been thinking about? We've heard like the possibility of the council being involved in some way. Are there sort of a range of approaches, and can you help us think a little bit about how to really dive into this as a commission? So I really think this is consistent, like truly consistent with sort of the theme of the work.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to imply that the council wouldn't be central to the overall study, but right now the council has the ability to add. And in fact, in recent years, they've been really active in that area, adding 30 or 40 a year. But there hasn't been a sort of comprehensive look across the agencies that is a publicly transparent process. And so some agencies continue to have really units of appropriation where programs are lumped together in a way that it's really hard to understand. DFTA, and Department for the Aging, and Department of Youth and Community Development are other examples with programs in the same unit of appropriation that have almost nothing thematically to do with one another. So one could see merit to pull them apart. The suggestion was really just trying to think about, times change, programs grow and shrink. There's a balance in the budget. There are other processes written into the budget that require corrective actions or replanning every couple of years. Maybe that's a way led by the council to go through the UAs and think about how to shift them so that they reflect whatever the current era is.
My question was directly related to that, and you may have answered it by mentioning the Department of Youth and Community Development, but I wanted to know if units of appropriation are inherited, like if they come the same way year after year, or and so that was one question. So I wanted to know if they were inherited. Second, I wanted to know if there were some particular offenders. I wanted to know if the New York Police Department, what their UAs look like. And so that was a couple of my questions.
Yeah, so as I said, the police department has a couple really, really broad ones. Department of Education also has basically almost I think it's a quarter of its budget. I'll check on that in one UA. Again, it's really hard to understand by borough or district what's happening in a school if the accounting unit is so large. There's some agencies that have done a lot of work. HRAs, UAs align with their programs, and they are inherited. They basically stay unless, there's a council maneuver to add or reduce, but they are they were designed to be a consistent way to understand what's happening in the budget.
And they are the same year over year.
Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you for your testimony. I want to piggyback on the question that the chair had asked earlier about OMB, and it seems that, and this is related to the UA question. So you sort of pointed out in your testimony that this would be a way to improve transparency and help the council's ability to understand what's going on. But there seems to be this other issue where OMB sort of slow rolls approval of headcount, doesn't offer or offer a very slow salary range. I think the example is what we have is that for CCRB, we've been told that OMB hasn't allowed them to hire up to their approved budgetary headcount. So besides, fixing UAs and creating more accountability there, I was wondering, do you have any suggestions that we should look at or ideas how to make sure that OMB doesn't continue this sort of shadowy version of impoundment that it's doing?
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. I think it's a management issue.
Well said. Any other questions?
Don't you want to ask me about the invoices?
Do I want to ask you about invoices? I just did.
No, so on the invoices, on human service invoices, if you set directions that you could 80% of the invoice could be paid up front. That's not a front in the contract. That's per invoice. Remember, every provider is audited anyway, but it would get much more money out and it would stop the argument about the tiny thing holding up the whole. So we really feel that it would not risk the overall stability. This would be for providers in good standing. And I appreciate you allowing me to encourage that question. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for your testimony. Now I would like to call Council Member Gail Brewer to testify.
Thank you very much. I second everything that IBO said. Let's see. So I'm Gail Brewer. I represent the Upper West Side, parts of Clinton, and all of Central Park. And I offer the following suggestions. Number one, to expand advice and consent. There were many debates throughout the 219 charter revision process, which I initiated with then public advocate Tish James. Members of that commission had very different viewpoints from one another, from the Republicans representing Staten Island to Sal Albanese representing Brooklyn, and they reached an agreement. One of the consensus outcome was that the mayor's pick for a corporation council should be determined through advice and consent, and it has proven to be valuable, as you know. There's no reason other agencies should not go through the same process. Other major cities like Los Angeles and Chicago, and even the state of New York, have been using advice and consent for many years. When you have extra public scrutiny, you end up with the best people. Number two, protection for the DOI commissioner. The city charter says the mayor has the power to remove the Department of Investigation commissioner as long as he or she gives an accounting of reasons for the firing and allows the commissioner, quote, an opportunity of making a public explanation, unquote. This commission should explore strengthening protection to prevent the mayor or any mayor from removing the DOI commissioner single-handedly. I know that the governor recently made some suggestions when she was offering how to work with the mayor. That was one of her suggestions, was that the DOI commissioner should report to the state DOI commissioner. I don't think that is well received, but the concept is there. Make sure that the DOI commissioner is not single-handedly fired. 3, implementation of local laws. In all administrations, laws that are passed are sometimes not implemented. No surprise. For example, the council passed reforms to city FEPS, July 2023, that went into effect on January 9th, 2024, but have not been implemented, as I think many of you know. Former council member Lou Fiddler, may he rest in peace, when I served with him, said to the 2010 Bloomberg Commission that the charter should require all laws passed by the city council go into effect unless the mayor is sued to stop them. His recommendation would go a long way toward communities knowing that what passed into law was. Number 4, revenue estimates. There's a lack of trust in the administration's revenue estimates and no consequences for getting it wrong. This charter commission should recommend joint revenue estimates, also known as consensus estimates, between the city council and the mayor. For the new fiscal year, the council and other entities such as the Independent Budget Office, IBO, were correct in their analysis as to a higher revenue estimate than that of the administration. That is how budget cuts were restored, but they were not needed in the first place. Best example, libraries. Libraries did not have to relinquish their Sunday service. They had to close on Sundays, and then they had to open on Sundays. That was not an example of transparency in government. Number 5, as you heard earlier, review the unit of appropriation structure. U of A should be more particularized to make budgetary decisions more transparent and less broad. Today, and I think you heard this earlier, the Department of Education puts $8 billion, over 23% of their $33 billion budget, in a single U of A entitled, quote, General Education, Instruction, and School Leadership, unquote. Another example, the police department mixes the budget of all, as you heard earlier, 123 precincts, along with the borough-wide offices and such divisions such as detectives, forensic investigation, narcotics, and strategic response into a single operations U of A. That single U of A accounts for a quarter of the $6.4 billion departmental budget. One way to improve the structure would be to study each agency and their U of A's and create a comprehensively revised U of A approach, balancing accountability with transparency and fiscal management, as you heard Louise Chafee talk about. Number 6, funding formulas for oversight agencies. This is what I feel very strongly about. Unless the city council increases Citizens Complaint Review Board, TCRB budget year after year, they do not have enough funding to increase all of the complaints within their jurisdiction. I think somebody on this board knows this only too well. It is crucial to shift the CCRB budget model into, quote, a guaranteed headcount, unquote, to a guaranteed dollar amount based on the NYPD budget, for instance. In some cities, the funding for oversight is guaranteed to be at least 1% of the budget for the police department that they oversee. This model has been successful with the IBO, whose budget, as you know, is tied to the budget of OMB. Similar funding models should be considered for all other oversight agencies, such as the Department of Investigation, the Board of Correction. We're always trying to find more money for the Board of Correction, and the Special Commissioner for the city school system. She has so little money to do so much for that large billion DOE budget. Number 7, very personal, destruction of landmark buildings. As you might have heard, I'm trying to save West Park Presbyterian Church, which is a landmark building. The landmarks law includes an unfortunate loophole which allows the Landmarks Preservation Commission, without any city council oversight, to grant permission to developers to destroy existing individually designed landmarks based on alleged hardship. This is inconsistent with the intent of the landmarks law. The loophole should be closed. They should have to go to council. Number 8, mayoral appointments to boards and panels. The mayor has too much control over the makeup of boards, such as the Rent Guidelines Board, the Board of Correction, and the Advisory Board on the Judiciary. The City Council, borough presidents, and the public advocate should have more spots to fill, so these bodies are not simply pass-throughs for the mayor. Finally, number 9, Law Department representation and settlements. Corporation Council has too much discretion to represent current and former members of the NYPD, including the mayor and members of the administration, when they are accused of wrongdoing. Further, the voters should decide if the city enables bad policing by aggressively defending against misconduct claims instead of demanding changes to NYPD practices. And then I'll say something that even Kathy Wild agrees with me. I do think that the city council, and this is really controversial, should be 12 years instead of 8 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Just one question to clarify. We heard at a previous hearing about the idea of the expansion of advice and consent for the police commissioner. What agencies do you feel should be included on the expanded advice and consent that you suggest?
To the credit of the speaker, she listed 20 agencies, health, housing, and so on. And I would include those 20 that to be on the list, and the police commissioner. She didn't list the police commissioner on her list, but I would say it would be a fine. Many other cities do it. I called personally Chicago and LA. They have oversight, advice, and consent over every single agency.
Thank you, council member, for your testimony. On the expanded advice and consent, what are your thoughts on ensuring that a future council with this power just wouldn't sit on a nomination, much like the U.S. Senate years ago sat on President Obama's Supreme Court nomination? Would you be in favor of some type of shot clock, either 30 or 60 days, where if an appointment is made, someone's nominated, but there's no hearing, that person is just sort of pushed in the wind?
I think lots of stopgaps like that. I'd like to see what other cities do, because they haven't had any problems. I said, haven't you had any issues? And they said no. So I think whatever they would do would make sense. You know, if we pass legislation and the mayor doesn't veto it within a certain, or pass it, sign it, it becomes law. So there's there are examples and precedents as how to handle that.
Commissioner Lonnie, do you have a question?
Oh, are you speaking to me?
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh.
Can somebody raise the volume, please? Try again, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello? You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Brewer. I thought you had a lot of great ideas in there. I have a couple of questions to follow up. One of them is about you mentioned a couple agencies or offices, entities that you called sort of the independent entities. I didn't hear you mention the Conflicts of Interest Board, but I'm curious to know if you would include them in the category.
Absolutely
Sorry.
glad to do that.
Yeah.
There are probably even others that I didn't mention.
Okay, thanks. And if I can follow up there, I also would like, I thought your
Hang on, Commissioner, we're having a problem with your sound.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, try it again.
I'm gonna try again. I thought your idea about using a 1% figure for this piece here, because I see you shaking head.
All right. Okay. Sorry, you on mute.
If it's okay, I'm gonna relay my question in writing to Commissioner Gewalb, and because I don't want to torture everybody with this volume, and I appreciate everyone letting me participate remotely. So I'm gonna send my questions to an emissary if that's okay, and he can ask you. Thank you.
for addressing it rather than going to court.
Okay. And would you agree that the mayor does have the ability to not enforce certain laws under either state law, or if he believes that the law contradicts, his obligations under other laws? I mean, isn't that sort of what the court system again is for, to settle those disputes?
For something, yes, there is obviously an opportunity when that is brought up, but I do think there's so many situations now where the laws are not being implemented. And I think it needs some more discussion rather than what you just suggested. Now, sometimes we're preempted, but usually the preemption is discussed and the law is not passed because we're preempted by the state or federal government. There's just an awful lot now that is not being enforced.
Got it. I would be curious as to what other laws other than city FEPs, you believe aren't being enforced.
I'll get you a list.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm sure you already have the list. And then on advice and consent, I guess my question is, isn't there a concern that if you expand advice and consent, you sort of politicize a process that may not need to be politicized? In other words, right? I mean, forget about the current situation, but you end up with a pretty divisive council or a council and a mayor that don't like each other. And all of a sudden, either the process gets slowed or the council takes advantage of their powers by, unnecessarily delaying or rejecting mayoral candidates.
You'd be surprised to know that the entire state of New York, they all go through the state government, Senate, all of them. So the governor goes to the Senate for all of her appointments, and you don't hear anybody being politicized about that. I think what it does is it also gives the public a little knowledge as to who the commissioner is. Otherwise, you never know. You do have to have some stopgaps. I know that the last hearing was not everybody's prime spectacle of how to conduct a hearing. I know exactly what you're talking about. But I do think that the process that is done in other cities works. The mayor then has to come up with some really good nominees. In this case, I have to say many of his nominees are excellent. But I do think it could help make them as good as that, even in future administrations. I like sunlight in government.
No further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Councilmember, thank you so much. When I started 20 years ago as an intern, close to your office, I just think you're
the only person who hasn't been an intern in my office.
I think you've been close to the gold standard of what a thoughtful legislator is, and thank you so much. Just specifically with regard to your comments about the Mayor's Advisory Committee on the Judiciary, which is the only time we've heard this so far, and I was so happy to hear it. Can you just briefly expand on what you might think a good layout for that balance would be?
Well, I mean, I think it's like everything else, it needs a discussion. But the reason I think it's important is I just met with family court chief judge, who is phenomenal, and they are short judges. And I'm sure there are other branches. I just happen to know that court. And it is creating a lot of challenges to get the work done with very complicated cases. So I would think that if there were more people represented on that commission, then there might be a faster movement to try to find. There are certainly fabulous New Yorkers who could be judges. So it's sunlight, it's transparency. That's what I'm looking for, however we get there.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I have one more. Yeah. Hi, Councilperson Brewer. Just a quick question. Did I understand you correctly? When you were concluding your remarks, did you sort of slide in there something about term limits?
I did.
Okay. I thought so. Could you just elaborate on that, on the argument for 3 as opposed to 2 terms?
Yes, I mean, don't forget, I had 3 under Bloomberg, very controversial. A lot of the legislation that we passed that was, I think, good, paid sick days. I did paid sick days, not de Blasio, let's be clear. So that was in the 3rd, my open data bill. It just takes time. And I can see now with 8 years, I already have tons of years. So it's not necessarily what I'm talking about for me, but I can see how people gain experience in 8 years. It goes very fast. And then they're out and we're back to musical chairs. So I know that it's not popular with the public because they hate politicians and they hate government. But I think you should at least talk about it. I know the business community, Kathy Wild in particular, bent my ear this morning at a meeting saying, Gail, please go talk about 12 years. I think it would cut down on lobbyists also, because when you only have 8 years, they have, I like some lobbyists, but you don't have to have them all the time. And they would, have a little bit less business maybe. It's really fast, 8 years. Land use is complicated, budget is complicated. So I think 12 years would be a happy medium.
Thank you.
And Councilmember, to follow up on that, are you suggesting 12 years just for the city council or 12
Just
years?
for the city council.
Okay, thank you.
Right, anyone else? Now, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councilwoman.
Thank you.
And now let me recall Robert Stern, Morningside Heights Community Coalition. Thank you for your patience, sir.
My voice is a little problematic today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Robert Stern. I am Vice President of the Morningside Heights Community Coalition, or MHCC, dedicated to promoting affordable housing and preserving quality of life in Morningside Heights. Tonight, I want to speak to you about the community-led Morningside Heights rezoning plan. You can access the plan on the City Council website. It would promote the development of over 1,000 new apartments with around 300 affordable units and include a commercial overlay to encourage small business development. Formally developed with budget and resources from the City Council and the City Council Planning and Land Use Group, the plan co-applicants are our council member Sean Abreu, Borough President Mark Levine, Community Board 9, and the City Council itself. The plan is an unprecedented democratic grassroots initiative. Its goals and design emerging through small and large meetings, sometimes 150 participants gathered at Corpus Christi Church to capture the aspirations of our neighbors for preserving and improving our community's way of life. You can read more about it in the report Morningside Speaks, included in the online rezoning plan. In surveys conducted on community needs by MHCC, the #1 response was consistently affordable housing. As many of you know, Morningside Heights real estate is dominated by our world-famous local institutions: Union Theological Seminary, Jewish Theological Seminary, St. John the Divine, St. Luke's Hospital, now Mount Sinai Morningside, all of whom have entered into development deals, selling land and/or air rights to the highest bidders, mostly for well over $100 million, resulting in 30 and 40-story all-luxury towers with multi-million-dollar condo prices and rents exceeding $10,000 per month. And Columbia University, by far our neighborhood's largest landowner, is about to complete a 34-story tower intended for graduate students and affiliates only. Of the roughly 1,200 total units planned or completed across all building developments, none are considered affordable. Morningside Heights residents are living with zoning rules established in 1961. Our new plan calls for triggering mandatory inclusionary housing by upzoning development sites along Broadway, near transit station locations with height caps of approximately 22 stories, while imposing height caps on buildings at roughly current levels in the mid-blocks. The plan has been endorsed by multiple organizations and included in Borough President Levine's report, Housing Manhattanites. But the Department of City Planning has yet to provide its needed approval in order to move forward to ULURP, and so the plan is currently stalled. New York City residents desperately need more affordable housing developed in transit-accessible neighborhoods with good schools, nearby parks, and abundant markets. Morningside Heights is doing its part, stepping up to offer a democratically created affordable housing plan with the support of our elected officials. The plan should be allowed to move forward through ULURP toward final approval by City Council vote and quickly implemented to promote the affordable housing that Morningside Heights residents deserve. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Stern. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Stern, for your testimony. What exactly are you proposing should be the change in ULURP that would allow such a plan, such as the Morningside Heights plan, to move forward? Like where is the bottleneck? Is it with city planning or is it elsewhere?
The bottleneck seems to be with city planning at the moment, since we have all of the co-applicants on board that would be required. City planning has been resistant from the beginning. We had actually tried to secure resources from city planning through multiple meetings with Mark Levine and his team and others, including Community Board 9. And they felt at the time that there weren't sufficient number of units that would dictate that they would commit the resources. Therefore, when we had a meeting in our local community, it was attended by Speaker Corey Johnson at the time. He said, "I like what I'm hearing, and what I'm going to do is dedicate resources from the City Council Land Use and Planning Group to create a plan." So I think this is a bottom-up approach and not a top-down approach. And what needs to be recognized is that communities have a say, have a seat at the table, know what they want. And in Morningside Heights, they're saying, yes, let's develop in our neighborhood.
Sorry, you had said it was for a lack of units. Did DCP ever say what the magic number was, and why were you willing to go up to it?
So they never said a specific amount. They would throw out numbers like 5,000 units, then 2,500 units. But I think it's more than that. I think it is the control. I think it is, again, a top-down approach. And I think this is a potential model for other communities to offer their plans. Again, 1,000 units, maybe 300, 400 affordable. We are so short of affordable housing that any community that steps up and provides even a limited number of units, and again, this is without resources from city planning. This is dedicated by the city council. And again, $200,000 in addition was dedicated to conduct an environmental assessment statement, which is yet to be performed because city planning has yet to give this approval, even though the borough president, our council member, our community board, and yes, the city council itself is supporting this plan.
Mr. Stern, I know the mayor has a plan, City of Yes. Do you know how, I mean, the commitment is to build affordable housing. How does your plan dovetail with this plan?
Sure. Our plan, first of all, provides mandatory inclusionary housing. The City of Yes does not. The City of Yes, while we think it's wonderful that it gives opportunities to provide housing in houses, let's say in the outer boroughs, for example, it remains a trickle-down approach, believing that somehow affordable housing will be created. If we do nothing in Morningside Heights, all we will continue to see are all luxury towers and no affordable housing. That has been the track record now for several years.
So if you had a magic wand and you, having gone through what you've gone through with all the ducks in a row, if you could think about how quickly the process should be, sounds like you have all the partners, you are, have some plans in place, and there's already elected official buy-in. how long do you think that should be from where the community and the developers and everybody says, let's go? And how, what, I'm curious, what would be that time period?
So first of all, it's a long process to capture the aspirations of the community through visionary workshops, which we conducted, and small meetings, and gathering enough support from our local elected officials to recognize that the community is speaking up and saying, we want affordable housing. So that could take several months. Then a formalized plan, and this is a formal plan, a technical plan that has been formally developed by the City Council Land Use and Planning Group, and you can see it on the City Council website. So that's going to take several months as well. And then there is the environmental assessment statement, which takes perhaps several months, and then there's ULURP. But we believe that the ULURP process would go quickly because we already have the support of our elected officials. And if the controller is Controller Lander, we believe that he would support it right away. We know that Borough President Mark Levine, who's a co-applicant, would review it very quickly, even though I think he has 30 days. He said he would review it in 5 days. So if you line up all of the elected officials as co-applicants, it should accelerate the process. So the whole thing should really have taken maybe a year and a half, something like that. It has taken longer because we were delayed because of COVID, and we had lost funding for a while because it was allocated to emergency services, but it was reinstated by Speaker Adams and the council.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Stern, for your testimony. Now I would like to call Leila Logistical from City Club of New York, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name. You have to keep it pressed as long as you're speaking.
All right, you got the name perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Leila Logizico, and I serve as the president of the City Club of New York. Our organization was founded in 1892, and we have a long history of advocating for sound urban policies, transparent governments, and public accountability. I appear before you today to formally present the City Club's position on a number of critical issues. The first one, the need to prohibit the appointment of registered lobbyists to official task forces, working groups, and boards. This recommendation stems from a fundamental principle, which is the integrity of our policymaking process must be beyond reproach. The inclusion of registered lobbyists in these advisory and decision-making bodies presents an inherent conflict of interest, undermining the impartiality required for good governance. Task forces, working groups, and boards wield substantial influence over policies that shape the city's future. Allowing individuals who are paid to advocate for specific private interests into these roles risk distorting the public decision-making process in favor of special interests rather than the greater public good. To restore and uphold public confidence in our institutions, we urge the Commission to adopt a clear restriction on the appointment of registered lobbyists to these entities. This measure will help ensure that advisory boards remain independent, transparent, and dedicated to serving the interests of all New Yorkers, free from undue influence, bias, or external pressure. Our second recommendation is that we urge the city to uphold a more stringent procurement process. Currently, agencies and authorities are permitted to change the scope of an RFP, giving them discretion that can actually provide an advantage to the initial respondent. the discretion to change the scope of work on a project subject to RFP without requiring such project to go back to bidding is a problem in the procurement process. It is critical that procurement integrity is protected for transparency and integrity. And we urge this commission to take a deep look at this issue, as it is currently an ongoing problem with a particular project that we'll be happy to discuss. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you for your testimony. I did have a quick question about whether you were proposing that all categories of lobbyists would be prohibited from serving on all manners of task forces, or only in instances where there's a conflict between their private lobbying interests and the subject matter of that board.
So as a matter of principle, we believe that in order to uphold the integrity in all circumstances and at all times, it is much easier to make the role very clear, so that you don't have to give any discretion or trying to interpret whether that particular individual has a direct conflict with this particular action. To make it very clear and transparent would actually strengthen the confidence that the public can have in the institutions.
Thank you for your testimony. I have a question along the same line. So I believe there's years, I run a large labor union, and I think there's years when I've had to register as a lobbyist. And in my head, and I'm here, you're welcome to argue otherwise, that I'm lobbying on the behalf of our 90,000 members who live and work in New York City. It's not for a profit motive. It's to bring the voice of those workers to the forefront in different situations. And so I guess how you would you distinguish between that, which I think your previous answer said no, but I just want to play it out a little more.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. This is something that, lobbyists represent a variety of, organizations and interests. None of them are inherently good or bad. The issue here is actually to give one particular voice a larger role or influence on a particular body. And I don't think I'm qualified to decide that this one is a good lobbyist or this one is lobbying for an issue that is not so good. I don't think that there is any, qualitative measure of what is, a lobbyist that is acceptable or another one that is not. Lobbyists lobby for wonderful causes, including reproductive rights, the environment, but that's besides the point. The point is that they exert an influence on a board that is supposed to be free of these influences. I think lobbyists have many opportunities, and organizers and members of the public have many opportunities to actually exert their voice. But the boards, the task forces, and the working groups should be made up of individuals that are actually protected from this additional influence.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you share some of the ideas you have about the more stringent procurement process?
Yes, and with your permission, I will give the specific example that I'm referring to in the concern that we're raising. Currently, NYCHA has issued an RFP, actually back in 2021, for a very large and significant project. The RFP was the contract was awarded to a participant in the RFP. Subsequently, the scope of work for this particular project was changed 100%. It was meant to be a full refurbishment of 2 NYCHA campuses, and it is now a project that calls for the entire demolition of the project and the reconstruction of the project. That particular project, the demolition and reconstruction, in essence, has not been put to bid. No one has bid on this project, even the awardee of this RFP. Therefore, it is very difficult to assess whether what is being proposed, which, you know, this project is has a price tag of $1.9 billion. Nobody knows if it is, you know, fiscally sound. Is it really a 1.9 billion? Maybe it's going to be more, maybe it could be less because the project has not been put to bid. But the authority had the ability, because there's no requirement in the charter, they had the ability to actually change the scope of work. It does not define how much can be changed, but in this particular instance, it is 100%. I personally believe that a modest change in the scope of work could be totally acceptable. But such drastic change should actually not be permitted and should be required to go back to bid.
Yeah, part of the reason why that is because NYCHA is not subject to the procurement because it is an authority on the federal guidelines. So I just want to clarify the scope of this commission within the charter because federal rules supersede in terms of NYCHA, right? And so part of what you mentioned in terms of procurement would not be subject to this charter commission's scope, but rather to federal procurement rules that are changed. Just want to clarify it.
Great. Thank you so much for the clarification. We really appreciate it. It is my understanding, though, that city agencies and you know, let's say public corporations such as EDC would have the same ability, and it is our recommendation that, you know, this commission strengthens the procurement process so that a scope change would actually be, you know, moderated in some way. Once again, you know, I think that it is reasonable that the scope could change, but, you know, up to a certain point.
Thank you for the clarification. Questions? Anyone? Thank you for your testimony today. So next, we'd like to call Carolina Salguero from Portside, New York.
I loved hearing the proper pronunciation of my name. Thank you. Hang on, I have to control the buttons in the paper. So, thank you for your work on this commission. I'm Carolina Salguero, the founder and executive director of the award-winning nonprofit Portside, New York. We propose a change in the city charter to create an agency for maritime. New York City had such an agency for over 100 years under changing names. The last version was Ports and Trade, which closed in 1991. Maritime activity of all sorts has suffered since then due to the lack of such an agency. If maritime is a language, New York City was once fluent but has lost that language. And that lack of fluency means that the requests of diverse maritime entities, local and visiting, have not been heard for years. And we all hope your commission can hear us now. Maritime entities based in New York City are attempting to visit and encounter a forest of red tape, inconsistent rules and permits governing docking and efforts to build or repair piers, badly designed piers, and no one entity in charge. Instead, there are overlapping bureaucracies and jurisdictions and no coherence and a boat unfriendly environment. Now, there are good governance reasons for an agency for maritime right now. The maritime contract between the New York City Economic Development Corporation, the EDC, and the Department of Small Business Services, SBS, assigned the majority of responsibility from Ports and Trade to the EDC in 1991. But one, the EDC is a quasi-governmental organization, not a city agency, and thus does not offer the same transparency and accountability as a city agency, and the council does not vote on its budget. Two, the EDC has internal conflicts relative to maritime uses, since some of their endeavors, particularly development of housing, represents a waterfront development tendency that has displaced many of the city's maritime functions and stunted the city's maritime potential. So the time for this agency is now, though really it was actually several yesterdays ago, Since the pandemic, the Port of New York and New Jersey has become the busiest in the country, and the city actually has maritime support businesses related to that. So don't just think that that just means big ships from other countries bringing us our stuff in containers. The local New York City and state commitment to build offshore wind facilities also depends on maritime support services. Those are local boats, local shipyards, tugs, barges, things like that. The ferry network in New York City and between New York and New Jersey has grown. But for example, the city no longer has a Department of Private Ferries. That was within New York City DOT, but is no more. New Jersey has a good example in their state office of maritime resources, but since New York State has no such office, the city doesn't benefit from the kind of resources that that could offer. So in New Jersey, actually cities and towns confer with that state office. We here in comparison have a total void. Another reason, honestly, is all the resiliency work, because the Maritime Agency, the kind of knowledge that you need for building shoreline resiliency structures, gray infrastructure. I know there are other kinds of resiliency things, but that kind of stuff, that's maritime expertise. And I think, frankly, a lot of our resiliency planning and construction has been slowed and hindered by that lack. I'll add that I founded Portside to create a maritime center, a Portside campus, to provide an example as to how to reposition maritime in the city's the redevelopment of the city's waterfront. And this May of this year will mark 20 years since our first business plan, and we still don't have space for that maritime center. And so that's a sign of really how unfriendly the city is to even award-winning maritime endeavors. And given the time limit, I've run out of 3 minutes, so there you have it.
Thank you. You know, one of the challenges that we have for this commission is the things that could be handled through possible introduction of local laws rather than a referendum. And that has been the case in our hearings so far. We know that Councilwoman Hanks had a proposed bill that suggested the creation of a similar office. Would you believe that it needs to go to a referendum? And are you suggesting in your testimony that should not be an office under the jurisdiction or the control of the mayor's office?
I and many others think it should be not just an office and within the mayor's office. I mean, really, maritime is such a big and diverse thing, currently important and potentially much more so. It really needs to have its own agency, and the stability that that has. Also, frankly, the separation of powers from the mayor, particularly if we want to think about housing, or, you know, if it's a sector that needs to have professionals that understand it, that are dedicated to it as a balance of powers. If it's an office within the mayor's office or even an office within somewhere else, as Camilla Hanks' bill proposed, that doesn't address what the harbor's been asking for.
Thank you. Are there any questions, commissioners?
A quick question. Oh, sorry. Hi, over here. Good evening. What's the anticipated budget impact of this agency that you're proposing?
I want to thank you for that question and say that I don't have an answer. So I've never tried to create a city agency, and I'm here. What I know about maritime is operational, how things work and how they're not working, what's impeding them. I don't know the cost of such a city agency, but I would say that right now we have a lot of maritime activity in the city, but we're paying for it in other ways. Maybe, you know, the EDC is doing a lot of things, but the council isn't voting on their budget. I mean, they make their gross and then they keep what, you know, and they pay some to the city. I don't know. For example, I asked what the EDC has been earning in the facility in the neighborhood where I'm located, and the nonprofit Portside is Atlantic Basin in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and we don't know. No one knows what's their gross and what's their net. So it's hard to say. Could that, you know, what could they, you know, what could that be paying? It's, you know, it's a black box. There's maritime functions also within other agencies, and I think a lot of people feel like it would help if we had an agency that was really expert, because there are maritime things done in agencies and also other authorities, like particularly the new parks. And I think a lot of maritime people would like to see a real solid body of expertise in the way that New Jersey State Department works, so that when a park is creating a new pier, for example, like when Hudson River Park created Pier 25, presumably for historic ships, it was really badly designed. It actually doesn't work for historic ships.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. Chair Garrido, I'm not going to say stole, but he hit on exactly my question when he asked. But I want to thank you for your testimony, number one. I do want to note, too, this is also a transportation equity issue from the perspective of some of us, including the Bronx. So I love this idea. I love that you're bringing it up. These are a lot of labor and union jobs potentially that we can open up. And this is an area that I think deserves to be answerable to the people as opposed to a pseudo agency with a lack of transparency. So thank you so much for your testimony today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, I'd also like to thank Carolina, who is a constituent who I've known. I would say, and I'm happy to share with everybody, Carolina does have extensive research and work on this that could not be captured within a 3-minute testimony or however long the testimony was. So thank you, and good seeing you on this side of the river.
Thank you, Mike.
Anyone else?
Anyone else?
Right.
And thank you for your testimony. Just briefly, is there a particular area of maritime that you feel that such an agency would really help? So Commissioner Ragland mentioned transportation and equity. Is this about improving ferry access throughout the city? Is this about what is the highest and best use of our waterfront? Or is this about trying to recreate or regrow ports and maritime commerce in New York City? Just trying to figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve.
All of that and more. So, and it's with this time limit. The problem, maritime is actually an incredibly diverse sector. And so there are many parts of it that would benefit from things that you might think of. I mean, it includes recreational boating, which frankly, there should be much more access to that in the city. But because the city has been designed in this kind of boat unfriendly way, or without that maritime fluency, you can't get onto boats or into the water. But I mean, also from all sorts of freight purposes, I think we'd have a better ferry system. All of this would work. But if I give you some specific examples, like the city via the EDC has been talking about a marine highway or a blue highway for a number of years. That's proceeding very slowly. I think if there were an agency that was dedicated to that and had been existing for a while, that already would have been solved. I mean, I know that maritime people that I know, and including me, have talked to the EDC about moving freight in and out of Hunts Point by water for 20 years. That's not rocket science. But I think the EDC has many other priorities. They have high staff turnover. There's some features to them which are not like a city agency. I mean, also their staff turnover is so high, it's very hard to advance a capital project. The Maritime Department with the EDC has changed names over the years, but it's been called Maritime Ports. I think it's now Transportation. It's generally a planning group, very small, and then the assets are managed by an asset management department, which actually, when I encounter those people, they generally don't have a maritime background sometimes. So there's a split there that's, maritime people should be thinking about planning, designing, building, and supervising and permitting on our waterfront and advocating for things. So moving things out of Hunts Point by water, for example, with the terrible traffic and EJ issues and asthma up there, waterborne transportation is a greener form of transportation. And it solves all those problems. Or if we look at the discussions of what happened with the last mile facilities, this city has lacking a real maritime, let's call it a voice, that coming out of an agency, it has just not had plans to foster or facilitate or incentivize moving that freight by water. Whereas, let's say Baltimore instituted a maritime industrial protection zoning in 2004. So whereas in New York City, we have things like M zone, it's manufactured, you can do industrial maritime there. IBZ, industrial business zone, you can do it there. Or SMIA, significant maritime industrial area. Those are 3 acronyms which do nothing to incentivize maritime of industrial maritime property. So I'm in Red Hook with Portside, and we watched during the pandemic, like mushrooms after a rain, ginormous last mile facilities come to the Red Hook waterfront and right across Gowanus Bay to Sunset Park, and no one's moving anything by water. And the city has no tools to really be incentivizing that. So there's a scramble on the part of a lot of elected officials, bless them, for coming up with other sorts of regulations to incentivize this, that, and the other, or, monitor the exhaust coming out of these places. And that's an example of maritime fluency lost, things not happening. And this is kind of one of the difficulties when advocating for maritime, since we don't have it. Like, what are you talking about? I feel like is often the problem I encounter. Like, I can't see it. Where is it? We don't have it. Who has it? Is it here? How do we do it? What is it?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to know the time is 6:58. We're trying to keep ourselves to be disciplined. I thank you for your testimony today. I think we need to move on. On Zoom, we have a person named Stephen Lyman from the Maritime Association. And since we're in maritime, Stephen, are you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
All right, hang on a second. We got to do a little maneuvering of sound. Can you go ahead, speak up?
Can you hear me?
Nope.
Can you hear me?
Hang on. A little louder, please.
Can you hear me?
No, Stephen, hang on. All right, try that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Given the time and there's terrible feedback that I'm getting, I'm happy to submit my comments to the commission for review.
Thank you, sir. That's appreciated. All right. And we
I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear you, so that's why I didn't jump on. I apologize. I am going to be quick. My name's LaDawn Hagland, and I'm a sociologist and professor at CUNY. I'm here today to support changing the city charter to create a dedicated maritime agency for New York Harbor and its waterways. I'm going to try not to repeat anything that Carolina already said, but I just wanted to add some points about governance. I'm somebody who studies water and urban governance, and I was honestly surprised to learn that we don't have a dedicated maritime agency in New York City. Nodal agencies are key to making complex systems work smoothly, and they help cut through bureaucratic red tape, coordination efforts across different levels of government, and they also follow up to make sure that policies are actually implemented. So right now, New York Harbor is a major maritime hub, but it's governed by a tangle of federal, state, and local agencies, all with overlapping responsibilities. A dedicated agency would bring these efforts together, improve navigation safety, reduce congestion, and resolve conflicts like those between commercial shipping lanes and the growing ferry network before they become major problems. Beyond safety and efficiency, a maritime agency could drive forward projects like the Blue Highways that Carolina mentioned, expanding waterborne freight and passenger transport to cut down on traffic congestion and emissions. I'll skip over some of this, but I also want to say that this agency would also play a critical role in climate resilience, which is another area of expertise that I have. And the way that would do that is by organizing the responses to different problems like rising sea levels, worsening storms, and pollution emission in waterways. Right now, efforts like, for example, the Billion Oyster Project and New York City's climate adaptation initiatives are working towards the same broad goals, but they're not always coordinated. A nodal agency could bring these efforts together, ensuring that seawalls, living shorelines, green port projects, and the like work in harmony instead of in isolation. So this isn't about replacing existing authorities. It's about creating a single entity to align maritime regulations, prioritize investments, and foster public-private collaboration for the public good. If New York Harbor is going to remain a global leader in maritime commerce while also tackling climate and environmental challenges, establishing this agency isn't just a good idea, it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And last and certainly no least, we'd like to call Tim Gilman from the Red Center. Hang on, you are on mute, sir. Can you speak up?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I am the former executive director of the Reti Center, which is a nonprofit based in Red Hook, Brooklyn. We are based on the water. I'm following up on both LaDawn and Carlina's idea of an agency. And the reason that I wanted to speak is because I can speak about waterfront engagement for the community and education purposes. We've been running a nonprofit that's on the water in Red Hook for about 5 years now. And so we brought down hundreds of community members, children, school groups, with the idea that stewardship of the water and restoring the ecological health of the water is of public interest and of increasing public engagement and opportunity. However, as a small nonprofit, in order to do things like get our seaweed farm permitted, it required us to deal with 5 different agencies. And it took over a year to get the permit. We're the first permitted seaweed grow in New York City and the second one in all of New York State. And we literally have dozens and dozens of volunteers, children, grown-ups, anybody who's interested, come down and help us. And just this idea that we can turn our waterways into another kind of a public park, community garden that would be really engaging with the whole city, just as we're also increasing commerce and increasing trade, as LaDawn and Carolina were talking about, just seems like a real opportunity for the city to see the harbor as a new kind of asset. So I won't keep everyone long because I know we're already over time, but I just would like to really very strongly consider that as the community does have an opportunity to re-engage with the water, we can do away with outdated restrictions that are still being enforced from the 80s and the 90s that scientific research has disproven. Things like shading decreases biodiversity in the water. And try to change that so that we can look at the restorative processes and the development that happens on the water that is actually improving water quality that has been documented across Europe and even more places around the states, like in Florida and Seattle, in Boston, where they're actually encouraging waterfront development because there's a way of bringing people to the water, restoring the water quality, creating economic opportunities, but also actually improving public access and the public attitude about something that it's been a site of pollution, but it can be a site of restoration. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Again, in the interest of time, it's 7:06, so let me just make a couple of announcements. The next hearings, just want to remind everybody, Tuesday, March 18th at Queensboro Hall, Thursday, March 20th at the College of Staten Island, and Monday, March 24th at Lehman College. All hearings are from 5 to 7 p.m. and folks are invited to testify either in person or via Zoom. Registrations and further details on all hearings are on our website, www.thecommission.nyc. Also, I want to thank everybody who came here to testify or watch us online or testify via Zoom, and the commission staff for putting this hearing together. Are there any questions before we adjourn? All right, with that, then can we get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Can we get a second? All right, we have a motion to adjourn, a second, which is not on the Roberts rules, something you can challenge. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and so ordered. Thank you very much. We are adjourned at 7:08.